The Collaborating Conversation podcast is for avid book readers, book lovers, and authors. Listen to this podcast as we talk more about the art of writing, stories behind books, and the hands that created them. So stay tuned and enjoy our show.
Welcome to the Collaborating Conversations podcast. Today's episode is part 3 of the Foundra Series deep dive by author Emmanuel M Arriaga. So these two pieces of art are unreleased. So a special snapshot. So these art pieces were specifically commissioned for the third book. And so this is Tyrvis, the Ageless Emperor, and this is Anima, the Ageless Empress, so his wife. Ooh. And so this is the Emperor and Empress of the Tuzan Empire. And so you can kind of see, they are both warriors at the heart. So Tyrvis is more of your traditional like warrior. He uses a great sword. He's really, is kind of like a front lines person. And Anima is more of a assassin.
I was going with mage.
She kind of
cool. I was thinking more mage with the magic fingers, but I guess that would also be like.
No, she's a mage killer, and so it's intentional. So she is an assassin, and so she uses subterfuge, and she's a Cephas killer by design, and so she kind of leads the. She's been in the shadows behind the scenes for the first and second book. I haven't really talked about her at all, but I introduced her in the third book. And you learn very quickly that she is ruling, in step with Tyrvis, right? So they have this, they both are the Tuzan Empire, right? The empire in terms of like, Tyrvis is more the figurehead, the frontline figurehead, and Anima works from behind the scenes. And so she's
cutting the deal. She's talking to people, getting things done on the back end.
She's more so killing people. And so, so she, her order is a special order of basically Cephas assassins that also are very good at hunting sentinels. And so sentinels are the silent hand of the Tuzan Empire, right? So Dexter's a sentinel. Sentinels are kind of like these stealth troopers that use, they infiltrate, they execute, they use sniper rifles, they use, camouflage, cloaking technology, they kind of go in, they monitor, and then they, eliminate targets, right? And so they're the Tuzan Empire's assassins and spies, right? And Anima has basically, she built up this order whose primary purpose is to counter the Sentinels, right? And so, a lot of Sentinels are very powerful Cephas because they kind of have to be, in order to, to spy on people, usually telepaths. Telepathy is the primary thing that Sentinels focus on, but her order is focused on finding and weeding out Sentinels, right, and killing them, and kind of operates in the shadows just like the Sentinels do, but by nature of how her order was built, they are also Cephas killers, and so the worst thing, like Anima up against Sock would be a very scary fight because, everything in Anima's arsenal is to kill a Cephas, right? And so, it's a very interesting, she's a very interesting character. I haven't talked about it all yet, but she is a very powerful character whose story, is pivotal to the broader Foundra Universe. And leave it at that.
Characters. Yeah, that sounds awesome. When developing characters, are you kind of doing a character balance? Like in video games, you have to balance your assassins. You're like, Team Fortress 2. Like everyone kind of played that at some point, right? you have to balance the game. So are you kind of thinking this from a DM where you have to balance your characters? Like you have to develop one that can take one other out, but has certain weaknesses and advantages, and right? Because clearly these are well-defined and very detailed characters.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like, so Tiravis is more of the frontline soldier. Anima is more of the behind, so like they complement each other, right?
Yeah.
So like if Lenret were to face Anima, right? Like Lenret and Tiravis are very similar in terms of their skill set and abilities, and so that would be a threat to Anima, like she's not, her skill set is not defined to fight Tiravis or Lenret, right? She's, Tiravis is designed to fight Lenret, right? So, and so, there's a balance between the classes in that respect.
Do you kind of view it as like being a dungeon master, like when you're writing these characters and trying to develop that story? Like, are you thinking ahead what would be a good attack, a good defense, a good like counter, a good counter?
Not so much for the characters; it's more so for the classes. So each character in my universe has a defined class, and each class
that's their race, right?
Huh?
Is that their race? Is that essentially their class? Or
No. There's different races and there's different classes.
Okay.
So here, let me finish going through the races, and I'll talk about the classes. So the remaining races were.
Yeah, you never answered my question. How many races do you have?
Yeah, so the Kentar, the Husian, the Jun Sarinta, the Kuvan, the Lexameni, Tuzan, which are you can count them as separate, but they're not really. The Uri, the Vampire. I don't have any Vampire character art yet. That's probably the next thing I'm going to get done. But the Vampire are like these super, they're vampires, but they're not. It's like I wanted to have a species, that kind, a sci-fi species that elicited feels of vampirism or vampires.
Tell me you're a vampire without telling me you're a vampire.
Yeah, and so their culture is very, very much in that lore. And then there's the Irritine, which is a species that I introduced in the second book. They're like these corded tubular. They're one of the first species that I introduced that looks completely alien. And there are more I plan to introduce, but they're the first that, if you look at them, like they do not have a humanoid appearance. And they do not move like humans. Their appearance is very otherworldly. And that comes across in the, they're the founding species for the Ashna Maiden, so the Irritine. And so, that's a species that I introduced in the second book.
Is there a reason you've kept a lot of them humanoid? Is that just more easy drawing, or?
No, I mean, I always intended to, the current ones are humanoid, but they, that's in many ways, that's because that's, those are the species that are, more easily able to form alliances with, right? Mm-hmm. And so a vast majority of the story so far has taken place, in the Husian Alliance,
right?
Or in the Husian Alliance space, right? And so, the Husian Alliance is this collection of the Kentar, the Husians, the Huxum, the Dasfen, the Ori, the Vampire, the humans, and a few other species that I mentioned briefly, but don't go into a lot of detail on. And all of those species, have humanoid characteristics, and so it's and so that's, in some ways it kind of talks about the biases, right? And so those, that alliance is made up of species that, they look very different from each other, but they still have similar characteristics. Whereas when you start branching out further from Husian Alliance space, you start to see species that are drastically different. And then, those relationships aren't always very, peaceful between the species, because there's that lack of shared humanity in appearances, and so the Irritine is one of those first species that I introduced. And it's no surprise that, they're one of the outer rim species, right? And so, their section of space is part of the Outer Rim, which is a section of space that is intentionally bordered and separate from the Husian Alliance, right? And so, because of that othering, they're kind of forced to create their own society, and they're more accepting of everyone, right? So they're the Tuzan, which the history and the lore, they're kind of forced out of the Husian homeworld, and put on this exodus. You can kind of think, you can kind of envision that they're put on these massive arc ships, right? And they're forced to leave Husian space, right? And they are forced to find a new homeworld.
Oof. I thought getting evicted out of an apartment would be bad, not much less getting evicted out of your home planet.
Yeah, and so that's the result of the Division War. The Tuzans lose the Division War, and so the Husians win, and the remaining Tuzans, as part of the demands of the Husians winning the war and the Tuzans losing the war, the Tuzans are forced to leave the planet, and so they build these massive ships, these colony ships, and they put these colony arc ships, and they put the Tuzans on them. And they say good luck, and they kick them out of Husian space. And then the Tuzans, I'll share how they because they end up settling on a planet very far away, and so I end up talking about that more in the prequel, as to how they they're able to establish their new homeworld of New Thai, and build a galactic empire that rivals the Husian empire, very quickly. That's all in the prequel plan, in the prequel series, a series that I plan to write, that talks about the origins of Tiravis, because Tiravis, he's been the Tuzan emperor for like 30,000 years, right? And so he's an immortal like Lenret, and Anima is also an immortal like Lenret, and so those two immortals, they kind of become the founder equivalent for the Tuzan people. Like they came after the war, right? Like they weren't, they weren't alive, during the time that Lenret and Sislot and Eknix were alive. They're much younger, but they're, so they're kind of like a new generation of immortals that bring the Tuzans out of their loss and, rebuild the empire. But yeah, those are some of the species, there's a lot more. I don't have an exact count. But
it sounds like you have at least 10 plus.
Yeah, a lot more than that. Because I didn't even talk about the anesmic species. So those are just species, some of the species from the twin galaxies, the Haven plane, which is the plane of existence that everyone in the twin galaxies lives in. But there's a whole other plane of existence called the anesmic plane, and there's a whole host of species that are native to the anesmic plane, that are fully developed species with characteristics and things like that.
Isn't that what happened at the end? I think it was Remy, or I forget the name of the
Remy. Yeah, she
got kind of teleported over there, right? She got pulled into the anesmic plane or the other plane.
Yeah, and she meets the Relish Kel, who are like these angelic beings, and the Eshgren are their counter species. They're the same species, except
And here I thought I had an over imagination, man. You've developed a whole world. Like, this is just amazing. Like,
yeah,
galactic world.
To your question about classes, so those are those races. So like, if I look at classes, I've created, I have a extensive D&D background, right? And so yeah. I wanted to have every character in my story, has some class that they're a part of, right? Because if you think about like a D&D story, right, like there is, everyone has a class, and that class is ultimately like, what their training is in, what their skill set, what weapons they use, what abilities they have, different things like that. Mm-hmm. And so there are many different classes that people, fall into in the Foundra Universe. You have your Cephas, who's kind of like your wizard. You have the Argents, who are like your specialized wizards. They use a different form of they use raw Nesmic energy versus Cephas, who manipulate a Nesmic energy. So the Argent is like like an advanced wizard. It's basically an order. So it's like Argents, like you can think of them. A good comparison is like the Jedi Order. So like there are the Argents have a rank system. So when someone comes in, you have to have Cephism ability, right? So like in the Star Wars universe, you have people who are force sensitive, but not everyone's a Jedi, right? And so you have a lot of people who are force sensitive, but only some people who, go become Jedis, go through Jedi training. So the same concepts exist between Cephas and Argents. So Cephas are people who have, ability and, have training, but just focus around Cephism. Argents are people who have, been specially trained from, a certain age, in this unique order. So you start as an Argent initiate, you become an Argent acolyte, as you progress in ability and go through trials and training. And then you become an Argent seeker, once you graduate from becoming an Argent, after you finish your apprenticeship, and then, you have your Argent knights, who are, who have mastered a specific school, in their, Argent Cephism. And then you have shapers, who are kind of like your Jedi masters. Like these are people who are the best of the best, who have mastered multiple, if not all, the schools of Cephism, and then you have your ruling leadership, like the Argent general, the Argent counselors, the first Argent, and so there's a whole structure for the Argents.
Looking for an exciting space adventure book, a romantic young adult story, and a fantastic sci-fi read? Get The Foundra by award-winning author Emmanuel M Arriaga today and prepare to feed your imagination with never-ending thrill ride.
And then you have the Shah Hunters, which are a species, a class that I introduced in the second series, in the second book. And so the Shah Hunters, so I talk about the Shah briefly in the first book. So you can think about the Shah as the enemies of the Argents. So, Argents are all about, having a connection to the Nesmic plane and, keeping order and balance, ensuring that, there's kind of stability in the use of Cephism across the galaxy. Shah are people who use something called blood weaving.
She's a bloodbender.
So blood weaving is horrible. So if you think about a Nesmic energy in the galaxy,
give me a Can you give me a refresher?
Yeah, so Nesmic energy comes from the Nesmic plane, and so it's revealed in the second book that a Nesmic energy was allowed to flow, or no, it's revealed in the first book that a Nesmic energy was allowed to flow into the twin galaxies in a response to Sagran's first reign of terror. Because Sagran has no gender, when Sagran first came and attacked the twin galaxies for reasons, they didn't really have a way to fight back because there were no Cephas, there were no people who had a connection to the Nesmic plane, there was no manipulation of Cephistic energy or a Nesmic energy. And so Sagran just decimated, wiped out entire species, wiped out, most of the galaxy, completely just wiped planets and whole species off the map, right? And so what the Relish Kel, who are this species that I reveal that kind of police the Nesmic plane, they, in response to that whole event, they open up and allow a Nesmic energy to flow into the Haven plane, which changes everything, right?
Because that essentially changes the laws of physics, right?
Yeah, it changes everything because, you basically, everything in the Foundra Universe today is based off of that whole concept of a Nesmic energy flowing throughout the Haven plane. So, Cephism, the whole, use of Cephism, different species like the Dasfen having this telepathic connection to each other. Like that's all because of a Nesmic energy, right? And so, these whole species came to exist in the ways that they exist today because a long time ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, they opened up and allowed a Nesmic energy to flow. And so entire species have come to exist and develop with a Nesmic energy, as a core part of who they are, that didn't exist when Sagarin destroyed the galaxy prior, right? And so it's very interesting because the Nesmic energy in many ways is the life force of everything, right? And so, it is the essence of life, as the Relish Kel call it. And so what happens when you twist that, right? Well, that's where you get blood weaving, because if everything is influenced by a Nesmic energy, if everything, is built on the basis of this, right? Like, what happens if you manipulate people's inherent energy, right? Like, what if you can use people to fuel your Cephism? That's what blood weaving is. And so
like Naruto or something, like when like you're stopping the chakra type of thing, but in reality, this is more of you're using other people's energy for your own purpose, like own gain type of thing. Like you're draining their.
So instead of using a Nesmic energy to fuel your Cephism, you use the life essence of other people to fuel your Cephism. Obviously horrible, right? And does
that cause permanent damage?
It kills people.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why I wasn't sure, because like I'm thinking like a battery where you just steal their charge or whatever. But you literally like use someone's life essence to fuel your magic, and that person dies and becomes a husk because you've just used them to to do something, right? And so it's a horrible, abhorrent practice, and it is the Shah or Cephas who have for one reason or another decided that they're going to use blood weaving instead of manipulation of a Nesmic energy like normal. And a lot of times there are many reasons why they do that. For one, you can be a very low, skilled or, not very powerful Cephist, but can do very powerful things with blood weaving, right? Because you're just using other people's life essence to fuel your stuff. You don't have to, have a deep connection to the Nesmic, because one of the things that I talk about in the second book is everyone has some genetic predisposition to a Nesmic energy. So, and that is biological, right? So you have people who, are very in tune with the Nesmic, have very high Cephism sensitivity levels. And you have people who have none, like Nevin. Nevin has no CSL. He has a CSL of 0, right? He has no connection to the Nesmic plane. He can't manipulate energy. He can't do anything, right? What happens when you have people who, some people who can manipulate a Nesmic energy and some people who can't? Well, that created the whole social structure, for the inequality and things. So a lot of the rich people, in the twin galaxies, their bloodlines are very powerful Cephists. Yeah. Because,
you know, that was power back in the day, right? When they were in the Stone Age, right? Like, you know, the people that, you know, subjugated the other people were the people who were, you know, had, you know, high affinity to the Anesmic. So like I said, when the Anesmic energy started flowing into the twin galaxies, it changed everything.
Are you going to allow the, because you mentioned a lot about gene editing. So you're going to allow genetic manipulation to connect people to the Anesmic in the future?
No comment. No comment. Wait and see. We'll see. But no comment. So the Shah, you know, so the Shah exists, but and you have this whole order within the Argans called Shah hunters, and their whole purpose is to hunt down and kill Shah. It's not to capture them. It's not to bring them to the light. It is to kill them.
Those are the blood ones, right?
Huh?
Those are the blood people?
Yeah, the Shah are the blood weavers, yeah. And so you have Shah hunters. And the thing that I reveal in the second book too is that blood weaving is so damaging, not just, you know, to the fact that you're killing people, but also to the Anesmic itself. And so any area where blood weaving has been employed, the Anesmic flow is tainted, is damaged, is you know, it's been forever corrupted. And so, you know, anyone who's a Cephist sensitive, you know, they walk into a space that there's been blood weaving, like they immediately feel it. They immediately get sick to their stomach. They detect a wrongness, right? And so, you know, clearly there are people who take this very seriously, and that's where the Shah hunters come in. And so the Shah hunters have these very special blades called Rafa blades, which I introduce in the second book. And these blades are alive, and they are. I don't get into it yet, but they are made via a special ceremony that involves the Anesmic plane itself and the Shah hunter. So it's this special bond or connection between a Cephist and the Anesmic plane, because, you know, the Anesmic itself views these Shah hunters as, you know, as wrong, right? And so these hunters are designed literally to hunt down Shah, so they can detect the you know, through their blades they can detect blood weaving, right? They can detect it, and so they can hunt it down
like a
very effectively.
Right? Like you can just get connected to that force.
Yeah, and so they're able to hunt down Shah very effectively, and they murder them brutally because of the wrongness they've done. So Shah hunter is another one that I introduce in the second book, and then there's space pirates, which I introduced in the second book. There's Sekniks, which are like combat engineers. There's Shah, of course. I just talked about them. You know, each one of these, you know, classes has specific abilities, and you know, weapons and armor. You know, how they look. Each class, you know, that's something that was really important for me too. Because if you think about D&D lore, like every class has a unique look to them, right? Mm-hmm. And so every class in my universe has a unique look to them as well. So like a Nistif monks wears similar types of clothing. You know, a Cephist, you know, has certain type, you know, robes and, you know, a Anesmic woven into them and stuff like that, right? So they have an appearance. There's the Nistif, the Scion of Ashna, which is another class that I introduce in the second book. So the Scion, you know, so Sarah Elax, who is the main character in the second book, she is a Scion of Ashna, and so Scions have these dual blades that are just these brutal weapons. So here's a picture of Sarah Elax. It just shows like her brutality, right? So she just has these very ornate blades that are just attached to her wrists. And so like when she's in combat, right, like she's very deadly. And her blades become extensions of her arms. And so it's just very brutal. I've actually had I have a lot of concepts for Sarah Elex. So here's another view of her character. Actually, this is a better one. This is a view of her character. So you can kind of see it was a different take on her blades. This were when I was playing around with like this is by a different artist. You know, so different concept for her character. You know, so I've had a number of different evolutions for her character over time. You know, so this is kind of like the creation process, you know, her characters. So you can see, you know, playing with different blades. At some point, you know, her blades are very similar to Blood Rain's blades. You know, because I really like that distinctive, you know, like style of, you know, these brutal weapons that just show like the brutality, the vengeance side of her character. You know, and the brutality of the Ashna Maidens, because the Ashna Maidens are this, you know, very powerful sect of all female warriors, right? And so, you know, they exist in the Outer Rim with the sole purpose of killing pirates, right? Not capturing pirates, killing pirates, right? And so, you know, and so because of that, like their character design is very, you know, very efficient in doing what they're set out to do, which is kill, right? So that's Sign of Ashna. There's Arclights, which are these hulking super soldiers in massive power armor. So the best example of that is Marcus Henson or Tempest. And this is new character arc that I had created for him. This is from a different artist that really was able to, you know, capture his power armor, you know, just this massive power armor with this devastating lance rifle and, you know, powerful shield, you know, because he's just a force on the battlefield. And so this is an Arclight. And so, you know, they're meant to be like, you know, if you think about a tank, right? Yep, like a tanking class, like Arclights are the tanking class, right? You know, it's like, you know, they are designed to take hits, you know, on the front lines. There's Lightsworn, which I created this is an instance where I created a class that I didn't use, but the lore is there, you know, and so maybe I'll introduce them at another point. And so I think, you know, one of the things that happens, I won't spoil it, but, you know, there's something that happens at the end of the second book that kind of leads to, you know, fixing relationship between the Outer Rim and the Hughesian Alliance, right? And so, you know, I'll be able to explore some of these Ashna Maiden classes that I created more, because they'll be a part of the Alliance. And then the Ashna Maidens themselves, Redolims, which are just a term for soldiers, Redolims are the class that Len Red is. So these blade warding, these, you know, think of them as like a techno samurai.
I remember when I read that. So I remember when I first read the book, I was playing a lot of Overwatch. And so as soon as you mentioned a lot of these characters, I remember thinking of Lenret as like Reinhardt, the techno samurai as like a Genji. Right? Like I remember like, and Remy as Mei. Like, I know it's not the correct connection because you don't want to connect a game to your book, but at the time that was really what I was thinking of, like connecting. So it was just, yeah.
Thank you for listening. Check out our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcasts if you enjoyed the show. For more books and inspiring stories from today's authors, please subscribe to our podcast.